Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 60 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, aka the mighty OGGO, also known as the only committee that matters. I've got a few things to go through first before we start recognizing folks. If you're sitting at home and enjoying this, please like and subscribe to the OGGO channel. I know. Now, pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, March 22nd, the committee is meeting today to discuss committee business. But I have a few things I need to go over first. They're all non-controversial, simple ones, but we need guidance for scheduling matters and other issues. First one is the President of the Treasury Board is available to come to the committee for the main estimates on May 3rd. So everyone's perfectly fine with that. Thank you very much. Another issue, just going back to ArriveCan, the Auditor General is studying ArriveCan as well. I would like committee's approval that we make all of the ArriveCan documents, the unredacted ones, available to her office, so she does not have to go through the whole process and the cost of getting the documents as well. We're fine with that? Yep. I suspect when the time comes, we'll ask the same for the McKinsey one, but she's doing the ArriveCan first, is my understanding. We have a couple budget items to go over. The budgets have been distributed by the clerk. The first one is Bill C-290, Act to amend the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act. It's $14,000, but because it's all internal, I think the witnesses are all going to be in person. I don't think we'll spend any of it, but we need a committee's approval for that. Perfect. Thank you very much. The second one is for the main estimates, 2023, 2024, $3,000. Same thing, it's all internal people, but we need that approved. Excellent. The third one is the never-ending shipbuilding study. Because of the dates around what we had approved the last one, I need committee's approval for the clerk to redraft a new budget by May 19th. This will just be a backstop in case we decide to travel from July to December. So we're just updating the numbers from the last time around. We're all fine with that? Yep. Wonderful. Now I'm going to turn things over before we get to anyone else. I'm going to turn things over to Diane, who's going to give us a brief on the updated report.
Hello. So there were a number of changes that you requested that we make to the report, about a handful of them. The first one is that we are proposing a title, which is, I think, to be more in line with other similar reports in the House. The title proposed is Question of Privilege on Providing Documents to the Committee. Another change we made was, since the last report, another department, ESDC, had finished their submissions, so we updated the number of departments that had not completed. Anyway, the number that have not completed is now 8 instead of 9. And we updated the date of that to April 6th. We also removed the annex because that, again, is not a normal procedure in a report to the House, and it doesn't really have any extra information that the House needs to make a finding of contempt or lack of privilege. Then we added the several paragraphs from Ms. Vignola's motion about the quality of the French language documents. And we singled out 3 organizations, Canada Post, Public Sector Pension Investment Board, and ESDC. The first 2 submitted unverified AI translations quite openly. They acknowledged that that's what they did. And ESDC had English pages where French pages should have been submitted. So there was a number of English pages in the translation that in the French version of the document. And when they resubmitted it with all the extra 227 pages, those English pages were still there. And then finally, we added a explicit statement that we would like to draw a breach of privilege to the House at the very end. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Diane. Now, so I've seen a couple people already, but I have to mention a couple things. The motion from Mr. Barrett under consideration was that the clerk of the committee send further correspondence to the departments to have them comply with the order from the committee, and that those departments who do not comply with the committee's order by Wednesday, April 12, 2023, be reported to the House. That is the outstanding motion, but I have to rule it out of order because obviously the date has passed. That was from March 29th. We're past that date. So given that the date proposed in the motion is no longer valid, I rule the motion out of order. And if there's any motions for the draft report, I see Mr. Barrett and then Mr. Johns.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the work that the analysts undertook over the course of the last 2 weeks, well, we received this, I guess, halfway through the last week, so they did it with 2 less working days than they would have normally with the Good Friday and Easter Monday holidays, which I hope they were able to take while preparing this. I'd like to draw attention to the section with respect to the disregard for the requirement for ESDC to properly respect their obligations to provide documents in both official languages. I think that that's a critical component of the breach of privilege that has occurred here. Of course, you know, we hear these terms breach of privilege and contempt, and sometimes they're used haphazardly. I think that when it comes to the power of a committee to send for persons and papers, that is not negotiable, though we have negotiated and we have given multiple opportunities, and those dates are very carefully outlined, meticulously outlined in this report. And the same is true with respect to the attention that is paid to the disregard for the obligation to respect both official languages. So it's, I don't need to give anyone lessons on minority language rights, but it does sound like someone needs to give a lesson to ESDC on minority language rights, and that's why I move that the analysts' report, I move that the 7th report, as tabled by the analysts today, be adopted and that it be reported to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Sorry, as amended? Just to verify, yeah.
Indeed.
Mr. Johns, you had your hand up after Mr. Barrett. Was it on this issue, or was there something else? Okay.
A motion I was going to move, but it sounds like there's a motion on the floor. Mr. Chair,
We'll
maybe you
then,
can
Mr.
help us.
Housefather.
Maybe you can help us actually while I have the floor. Maybe you can. Have you checked in to see how much money we've spent, this committee, on getting these documents, or has the clerk got a rough estimate of how much money we've spent? You know, this is a lot of documents. You know, we're talking thousands of pages of documents from departments, you know, and it takes time. We know that. It's evidence that 5 weeks was not enough time for what we were requesting, given the limited resources that the government has, and especially the Translation Bureau. And I completely support what Mr. Barrett said around respecting minority rights and Ms. Vignola's, concerns, and they're all of our concerns, that the quality of translation is completely unacceptable. But, when our offices, request ATIP requests, they often take months to get back, even just a small amount of documents, let alone tens of thousands of pages of documents, even in their original language and aren't translated. Can you maybe just share, have you or the clerk got a ballpark of how much money's been spent to get access to these documents? Like, are we into the tens of millions of dollars right now? I just don't want us to be spending more money getting these documents and getting them translated than McKinsey got in contracts from the federal government. I want to be mindful of taxpayers' dollars and where we're going. Initially, this whole study started with, I think there was concerns that there was a link to, the government to McKinsey. Then later it became about McKinsey and their connection to the toxic drug crisis, and now it's about parliamentary privilege. And I'm not saying these aren't valid concerns, but I am concerned about the time this committee's spending and where we're going with this and the amount of resources we're spending. And I take my part of the responsibility here as well on this committee. But I'd like to get some idea of where we're going and how much money we spent. And I think it's important that we get an idea to make some sound decisions here at this table. Because I know that our greater committee concern.
Do you want me to actually address the question, or are you
Sure. So before I do that, I know our committee's goal is to look at outsourcing as a whole. We need to get to that. And I want to get to that. We're spending a lot of time on this. So, yeah, if you could answer, that'd be great.
Well, I don't have it, but you can submit an order paper question, I'm sure, and get the answer. I'm not sure, Madam Clerk, if you would have a response.
I'm looking to see whether or not I have a response. I'm checking currently. What I would ask for clarification is, are you asking specifically about the McKinsey documents that the committee was obligated to translate, or the greater documents that the government was also obligated to translate? Because there are two streams of documents, one that arrived to us translated and one that the House of Commons or whatever person comes out of is paying to translate. And I'm just looking.
Translation is essential, so we have to do that.
Right. No, absolutely.
But I guess both. It'd be good to get an idea what we're spending right
Both.
now overall on this study right now on this motion, and maybe Madam Clerk, if you can also share, like, I have been on committees for years. I've never seen a committee ask for this volume of documents. And I know, Mr. Chair, you've been around for a while, so you can maybe share your.
I think the public health ones we did over COVID were greater than this.
Okay, so I'm sure
I'd like
I was
OGGO to
hoping you
claim
would
the
enlighten
title,
us on.
but I don't think we do.
I was hoping you'd enlighten us on your experience around it, but this to me, just as someone on the committee, feeling the volume of documents being sent to us, it is quite substantial, and I'm just trying to get an idea of how much money are we spending of taxpayers' dollars on this right now, and I'd like to get an idea, and I'm going to move a motion following the discussion on this motion, so we get an idea. I want to know, before we keep spending money.
I would just, you can do that. Obviously, you can do it on order paper question, but most of I'll speak a bit out of turn, is most of the documents that are being withheld from us, despite the committee order, have already been translated. They're already ready to go. They've just required the departments to do so, but.
I want to make sure that it's heard and said also that I want to see those departments in front of this committee so that they can explain themselves, especially the poor translation that's happened, so that we can ask questions and certainly give Ms. Vignola the chance to ask them very direct questions of why her privileges are not being met here at this committee. I think that's important.
It's everyone's privileges, not just hers, but I
certainly
understand what you're saying.
She's in respect to her.
Mr. Housefather, then Ms. Vignola.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my colleague and friend, Mr. Johns, for advancing, I think, a very legitimate point. I think, Mr. Chairman, I also accept responsibility. When we created this list of documents, this incredibly wide-ranging list of documents, I never in my life thought that McKinsey would be producing 91,000 pages, and the government would be responsible for producing multiple times that, and what the costs were in terms of manpower hours going into finding everything and producing it, and the cost of translation, both for the government and at the Translation Bureau. This is an incredible amount of production that I don't think in the end was really warranted in any way. Having listened to the witnesses from McKinsey, having looked at what we've received, I don't see that there's a smoking gun there that really required this level of scrutiny by this committee. What I think is, Mr. Chair, we all can learn a lesson from this, which is that in the same way at the Public Accounts Committee, which we're both talking about there's a specific number of vaccine contracts that were requested. There was a clear reason for requesting those specific contracts. Here, it wasn't requesting specifics. It was a random request for production, hoping something would be found in hundreds of thousands of documents. And I think the committee and all committees should learn a lesson from this and do better in terms of trying to narrow the focus of what should be received. I agree with what Mr. John said. I think that the correct approach here should be to bring the most egregious violators, the departments that were disrespectful of official languages, so ESDC, and whichever others that the analysts would identify as being the 3 or 4 worst violators, here to talk about official languages and the respect for official languages, and those who redacted the most or refused to provide documents to explain their rationale and defend it before an entire committee in public. I think that would be the correct approach, as opposed to referring this to the House, where I can see many, many hours and days of lost time in the House dealing with this issue as opposed to dealing with legislation and the budget. So, Mr. Chair, that would be my position at this point. I don't support Mr. Barrett's motion, but I will support other motions to do the 2 things that I mentioned, which is bring witnesses before us to explain themselves, and we can take whatever action we want after we hear from those witnesses, and support Mr. John's request for an accounting of what has been spent in light of the production requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Ms. Vinola?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start, I'd like to say that I think I'm able to express my own needs and desires, and I don't need any mansplaining on that topic. That being said, if the documents had been submitted from the beginning as they were requested, we wouldn't have to discuss this whatsoever. And we would not have to speak in the report of the poor quality of the translations that we received. Yes, this does have a cost. Now, I don't agree in saying that what we are doing right now is useless. Now, I don't think I've read all the 90,000 pages from McKinsey amongst all the other documents, because I do have a life. Of course, I have 4 children, so I'm quite busy. But what I was able to find, thanks to these documents, but also thanks to our witnesses, is that in the contracts, there was a requirement that we receive documents in English. And when you speak to each party, each of them says that it's the other party that made this requirement. We can also make a link between certain studies and decisions that were made by the government afterwards. There is data that led to policy, and then there are other things that do not take into account French. Now, we're not just talking about parliamentary privilege. Personally, I always think of myself last. That's how I am. Now, I am very stubborn, but at the end of the day, I'm not the most important person in this issue. What matters is that some of these documents are public documents that French speakers throughout Canada, not only Quebec, need to have access to, but unfortunately, they have not been properly translated. Now, we have 825 translators and interpreters, whereas in the past we had much, much fewer. Now we're using technology that isn't necessarily reliable. And I can guarantee you that translating a deep dive analysis, is very difficult, and I know that I can tell when it is simply a machine doing it. And so I understand all of this, and the fact of the matter is that even if there were fewer documents, they would need to be translated nonetheless. Now, let's imagine that we're talking about French documents and English speakers didn't have access to the documents. And then we said, well, it's too expensive to translate them. I'm not sure people would accept this. So, yes, it's expensive. I'm aware of this. I know that there are a lot of documents. I'm looking at them. We need to translate them. We need to give French speakers access to this information in their native language. And so I think that I should not have to apologize for being a French speaker and for requesting to have access to information in my native language. I will not apologize for that. And I'm personally going through these documents, and more than once, because I go back and verify that they correspond with the English version. So yes, I understand that there's a cost related to this. I understand the situation enough to know that what really matters is that we are efficiently investing taxpayers' money. That's what matters to me. We have a right to access high-quality documents. It's not just a question of parliamentary privilege. This is the Canadians' privilege as well. And so the government needs to comply with this. I don't know how else to say it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett?
Yep, thanks, Chair. The motion that we're voting on, hopefully, is to approve the report from the analysts, and I guess I would ask other members what they disagree with in the report from the analysts. If nothing, if the concern is cost, there is no cost to report on this to the House. So if we want to bring public servants or departments to committee to admonish them or to ask them tough questions, why? If we don't accept that they breached the privileges of this committee, why would we ask them to come here? They did or they didn't. So I don't understand why we would want, as a committee, to whitewash the situation. Has there been a breach of privilege, or has there not? And if there has been, why wouldn't we report that to the House? I guess those would be my questions, because I imagine this is going to be discussed for quite some time. What is incorrect in the report prepared by the analysts? Question one, I have not found anything. Number two is, with no additional cost to the committee, what reason do we have to not report this breach to the House? Because if we're going to plan to call bureaucrats here, again, I just don't understand what our questions would be. Because if we either agree with the report or we don't, and for it to properly be followed through on, it exceeds the authority of the chair of this committee and must be referred to the Speaker of the House. So we're either for the rules or we're not. There has been a breach of privileges, and the House should take measures that it deems appropriate. And I concur with the the report, as the 7th report, as amended, as prepared by the analysts, and am prepared to vote to that effect. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Johns?
Just just to respond to that, like I think that it would be the right thing to do to have the public servants come so we can ask questions. And why haven't they produced documents? Why is there delays? And I don't see anything wrong with that whatsoever. And then decide where we want to go with it, whether we refer it to the House or not. But I think just having them at least here at committee so we can ask them direct questions and get some answers, I think that would be the right step to take, at this point in time. It's like, let's get them here and ask them questions and have them explain to us what their obstacles are, delays, or why they're refusing to. And then we can go from there. I think that would be just a natural step.
Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Mr. Johns just stated. This is an opportunity to engage directly with the officials from the departments and ask them very difficult questions, shed some light, and I wanted to highlight that this is also meetings that would take place in open session. And so, again, I think we're missing a step here. I think I agree full-heartedly with what Mr. Johns has brought forward. And quite frankly, I don't understand why the members of the Conservative Party would not want to take the opportunity to again question.
Because they already broke the rules.
Mr. Barrett, let him.
Yeah, I don't know what they're afraid of in terms of taking that step and having that conversation and engaging with the officials directly and having them respond and having them respond on the record. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Mr. Johns has brought forward. I think it's a practical step.
Yeah, Mr. Barrett, let the others have their say. We'll go Ms. Block, and if you want to put your hand down, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would concur with my colleague, Mr. Barrett's observations on what the motion is calling for and what the really direct questions are. If we want to get into delaying what we obviously know is a breach of privilege, I would just like to ask the analysts perhaps how many times the departments have been contacted to get the information that we've been asking for and whether or not we've received responses from the department as to why documents aren't forthcoming or if they've provided any sort of excuses as to why they aren't being presented in the form that we have asked. Thank you.
Our clerk can answer that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Block. So, yes, the departments were contacted on a couple of occasions. So there were... Hold away. Désolé. Is this better? Sorry, constant battle. So there was a first volley of letters that was sent. All of the responses have been distributed to members of the committee. There was a volley of letters in the name of the chair, and then following that, there was a volley of letters in the name of the committee after the motion that was adopted. I believe I was going to say March 6th, but I have to verify the date. And so all of those responses were distributed to members of the committee. There were a variety of different reasons given, but they all sort of followed the same pattern of, I don't want to put words in the department's mouth, but protection of personal information and contracts and confidentiality. So I'd be happy to redistribute the letters to the members of the committee if you'd like, but yes, I've written over 90 pieces of correspondence for the committee, so there have been correspondences sent to the various departments and to. And when I say departments, I'm sorry, I also do mean Crown corporations and agencies. Just to be clear, there are 21 departments and Crown corporations and agencies that are tagged in this motion.
Yeah, maybe if you wouldn't mind redistributing them.
Okay.
I recall one of the departments, if I recall top of my head, claimed
Mr. Chair, just a
Constitution,
quick,
but we'll
just a quick follow-up. Did you say over 90 pieces of correspondence that you have sent to departments, agencies, and Crown corporations?
Specifically on this study, yes, that would also include correspondence to McKinsey.
Thank you.
So for the study.
So 90 times you have reached out.
No, there are 90 different pieces.
90 different pieces.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Vignola?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Étant donné que
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not often that we send a report to the House, so I'd like you to specify what are the procedural rules that apply here if there is debate on the report. Are there rules that allow for never-ending debate, or is there a specific time frame set aside for the debate? Thank you.
Are you referring specifically to this motion?
Yeah.
The motion can continue generally forever unless we vote on it.
quand on la dépose à la
When we table it in the House, when we table the report in the House of Commons, will there then be a debate, and what rules surround said debate at the House of Commons?
I'm going to refer to our clerk for that because she's a bit more knowledgeable and put her on the spot.
Very on the spot. I apologize. My knowledge of procedure in the House is not at the level where I'd want to give you an answer at this moment. I'd happily look into it. Just, je peux dire que juste déposer le rapport.
What I can say is that presenting the report is not enough for us to then move on to debate. There needs to be a question of privilege for the House to then speak of it. That's the first step.
Like Madame Mignola.
Ms. Cussie, you had your hand up earlier. Did you wish?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague, Madam Block, had asked how many times we had asked for, and I want to thank the analysts because it's outlined very clearly. The first time was in the initial response. The second time was when you personally went back and gave him that reminder. And as well, actually, it's been reported in the media that you chastised witnesses previously for not having responded in full, as I said, as is reported in the media. And then the third in the March 6th correspondence. So that's 3 times already. So, I mean, there is, you know, I think all parents, they use the three strikes, you're out. I'm telling you once, I'm telling you twice, I'm telling you 3 times. I know I, as a mother, sometimes use this. So I think the time for chances has run out. That there's, in my opinion, there's no question about it. As for Mr. John's comments regarding the cost, did he not know what we were requesting in the first place? Did he not anticipate the magnitude of documents that he would receive, that we would receive? Did he not appreciate the value that those documents would have to shed light on not only this study, but in fact democracy, and in fact the entire way that this government conducts themselves and the government of Canada, which we've seen in many other formats, is really trying to hide things. And this is no different. This is no different, Mr. Chair. So, you know, Mr. Downs, I'm incredibly disappointed in you today. Johns, it's very evident to me and to my colleagues what you're doing. You, like you do in all other places, are going with the government again. I'm not sure what they promised you or what they said you would do. You, in fact, it would actually be better for us to pass this motion, have it go to the House, get the documentation so we could finally finish this study. We could uncover not only for this committee, but for Canadians, what this government is trying to hide. But, Alor, today you have changed your mind. You have decided that something else is more important than that. It would actually be to your benefit to vote on this motion.
Point of order. This is ridiculous, Mr. Chair. A member is upbraiding another member in a way that is totally unacceptable. Please call this to order.
My point.
That is not acceptable.
I'm making my point.
Let me speak. I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Housefather. I have not heard any upbraiding. I've heard
Thank you. Thank you.
That
Let
me finish, Mr. Johns.
This is what I get.
Mr. Housefather.
Great job. Great job.
Mr. Johns, you'll have a chance
To rebut.
afterwards.
You will have a chance,
But I would ask that we all
Thank you.
that we all watch ourselves.
Thank you very much.
please.
So it would be to your benefit, Mr. Johns, to actually pass this motion so that it could be referred to the House. We could get the documentation in both official languages, which, by the way, if you really respected, you would have the expectation to receive. We could review those documents, hold this government to account, which I know you are not akin to doing, you and your colleagues, and then finally move on to the larger study, which I know you are very excited to do. So I'm not sure. I don't believe your intentions are good, Mr. John, showing up here today and
Point of order.
and suggesting
Point
that.
of order, Mr. Chair. Now she's imputing his intention. This is ridiculous that this is being allowed.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you a bit there, Mr. Housefather. If we just stay on
It's funny when
topic and-
conservatives say there's a gong show going on. What kind of gong show are you allowing here, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Johns.
I'm looking for
is a
transparency,
Mr. Johns, I
Mr.
have
Johns.
sat and I've
I'm looking for
heard-
transparency.
Ms. Kusi, please, I have the floor.
Thank you.
Mr. Johns, I have the floor. You can say that's ridiculous. I have heard of rather disagreeable, I would use a different word, but I won't. I've heard disagreeable comments made from all parties. I'm not going to single them out, but I've heard from all parties. And sometimes we just roll with it. Sometimes it gets a bit heated, but I've heard it from everyone, pretty much. I understand it's a bit heated. It's not how I would go, Mr. Johns, but I'm happy to discuss some of the comments you've made in the past, but I don't think that will add to it, Mr. Johns. You're welcome to rebut Ms. Kusi, but I would ask that, second time around, Mr. Housefather did have a point that we stick to. We're not going to agree with everything that's going on today, but I ask that we just stick to being a bit more, I guess, polite to each other, for lack of better words. But go ahead, Mr. Johns.
I was, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay, if you could stay on topic,
Okay,
please.
thank you very much. So, we can certainly leave it here. We will see how you vote on this motion. I don't expect you it's very clear you'll be voting against it. It's very clear. And, I would just, I feel we've tried to count on your support several times over, only to be disappointed or to have
I'm
Prime
going
Minister
to
Harper.
interrupt and ask that we stay to the topic and not chatting sidebar, but also directly to others about this, that you direct it toward myself.
Okay, thank you,
please.
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. So in summary, we've asked 3 times. 3 times is more than enough. The costs that have been expended are a result of the bureaucracies not providing us the documents that we requested. And this motion being made or this consideration of cost is not surprising, is disappointing, and I think is indicative of what we've come to see in this committee and in the House, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Johns, you're welcome.
Thank you. After the
I
assault of accusations and
and that's
already
fine, and I
deciding on
appreciate-
my vote, I will respond. And Mr. Chair,
And I appreciate where you're coming from, Mr. Johns. It just
look, hey, I put forward a motion to expand the outsourcing to 5 outsourcing companies. I didn't ask for all the documents specifically because I was worried about the costs associated with that and the time. Like, we'd be looking at a year from now, potentially, we'd be into hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. Like, it's funny when the New Democrats are worried about the cost of spending, and the Conservatives want to take ownership over that. Look, all I'm asking for is some simple answers, and I don't want the delays any more than anybody else. And, I don't want this report to go to the House with any appearance that this is an open matter as well. And I think it would be good, we get written responses and evidence from the departments in their refusal to comply to parliamentarians so that Canadians can see that. And if we send this to the House right now, we're giving these departments basically, the chance to say that they were going to submit the rest of these documents, that they were pending, X, Y, and Z or whatever. So I don't want any more delays or extensions. I think we should ask each department, you know, whether they're going to comply and submit these documents unredacted or refuse to adhere to the requests of this parliamentary committee. We should get them here so we can ask them directly why they're holding back. But I will respond to the many accusations. First, you know, here we're trying to be respectful here, and we had a member of the Conservative Party interrupt a committee member while speaking, you know, trying to just speak. If this is the decorum we're going to have here, we're not going to do well. And, you know, I'm not saying I've been perfect here either. I had a bad day. We know that, you know, and I'll take ownership over that. I had 2 young people die in my home community, and I had to come to this committee right after. It wasn't easy. And, you know, so I think that things can get heated here. But we want the same thing. We want to stop the outsourcing, extreme, out-of-control outsourcing. With McKinsey, you know, it started with we were trying to get the bottom of why McKinsey had this acceleration in outsourcing. Then it turned into a witch hunt about the Prime Minister's connections to the former head of McKinsey, Mr. Barton, which probably had more ties to Mr. Harper, actually, than Mr. Trudeau. So that got thrown to the side. Then it's now that McKinsey's responsible completely for the toxic drug crisis. I know I'm getting heckled again. But clearly, the McKinsey's involvement and the pharmaceutical industry's involvement in the toxic drug crisis, taking them to court is not going to solve the problem. We know that. And now we're into parliamentary privilege. Hey, look, I just want to get the departments here so we can ask them questions. Why the delay? I want to get an idea of how much money we're spending on this. And I didn't mean to insult anybody here by speaking in support of them or not or whatever. Be more careful of that. Thank you. But look, if we can get them here, we can maybe revisit this. But if we're going to vote on this today, yes, with this kind of energy, I will vote against it 100%. But no, I don't appreciate that. I don't appreciate that. I was open. I was trying to bring forward an open way forward, a pathway forward to have a proper conversation on this that I felt was the right thing to do after seeking advice from many people that have been behind the scenes working on ATIPs, working on many studies that are of volume and size and scope, and they were saying this is unreasonable and that we should be asking the departments to come here to sit before us before we take it further. And that's what I think we should do.
I appreciate your words, Mr. Johns. Mrs. Vignola?
Ça fait presque 3.
It's been about 4 years that I'm a member of this committee now. And things have always gone well, respectfully, even if we weren't always on the same page. And it's very important that it continues this way. Accusations, trying to read between the lines is not okay. We can dislike what someone has said without falling into this type of behavior. I think we all need to respect each other. And let's remember, we need to be an example for different communities. If we do not agree with one another, and react in the way that we have, how can we ask other Canadians to work together in a peaceful manner? Now let's get back to the report. So the goal of the report is to say that there has been a breach of our parliamentary privilege. That's the goal here. And so if we vote against this, I think that we're opening ourselves up to further breaches. We're allowing it. And for that reason, I don't think that we can accept this. We can't accept this because it will also have an effect on future parliamentarians because of our decision. So we need to think about this. It's not just about us. Thank you.
Mr. Housefather?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Vignola, for your comment. Before I begin, I'd like to add something. I've said it in English and I've said it in a call with Scott Atchison that we can disagree without being mean. And we shouldn't make things personal. It's unfortunate when people do so because it's really unnecessary. And I hope that everyone around the table will keep this in mind. Now, the question of the motion. If the committee carries this motion, someone may rise to say that they have a question of privilege, and if the speaker is in agreement that there is question of privilege, then this debate will have precedence over other debates in the House. And I think that the committee can decide if it is necessary to send something to the House. There have been several cases where parliamentary privilege may have been breached, and the committee didn't refer this to the House. I don't think that this created a precedent because the committee was not saying there has not been a breach of parliamentary privilege. They were simply saying now is not the time or it is not necessary to report this to the House. And so what I think we can do is say, yes, we should summon these individuals to the committee, speak with them, ask them questions to find out why there have been so many problems. And I think that a part of the problem is that we asked for hundreds of thousands of pages within a very short time frame. When, as far as I'm aware, when the government of Canada signs contracts, it is determined in the contract if the documents should be in French or in English. And in all cases, it's the supplier that decides what language the document will be in. Some contracts are in French, some are in English, and they're not always translated. Now, I agree that when the committee requests a document, it should be delivered in both official languages, and that Canadians on both sides of the language divide in Canada should have equal access to these documents. But the committee and I myself respect the fact and accept the fact that we requested a large number of documents within too short of a time frame. And what have we asked for? We've asked for everything, all the work that's been done on all the different contracts that we've requested. And when we're asking individuals to disclose documents, in many cases, these are very sensitive documents, and we might have to ask them, bring them here to ask them, why are you so afraid to share these documents with us? So I think that there's another step that we need to take before we send our report on this breach of parliamentary privilege to the House. And so this is the reason why I do not believe that we should carry this motion right now. I will have to agree with my colleague, Mr. Johns. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Johns, go ahead.
Regarding parliamentary privilege, I mean, I know it gives us party, and it's different than ATIPs for sure. But the scale of work we've requested is monumental, and the resources are still the same. We should be given priority as parliamentarians and have the reasonable right to receive these documents in a timely way in both languages. But we recognize it's still time and work being done by people, who are only human. So I just want to make sure that we're taking that into consideration. And my other concern is, well, anyways, I've said enough. What I hope to do, that we get those departments here, which I think would give us a pathway to where we go next.
Sure, and I appreciate that. And I will just address the comment from the feedback we've gotten from the departments, the documents are ready. They're translated. There was the ESDC issue, but the documents are ready and translated. Many departments have just flatly refused, saying that we do not have the right or do not have the privilege to see the documents despite the order from the committee. And that's the general feedback from the departments, stating that the ATIP law, for example, supersedes parliamentary privilege. It's not a matter if they don't have the resources to get them to us. They are ready. They're just refusing to, for various reasons. Sorry, Mr. Gould.
Oh, ça sera bon. Excusez, I'm sorry. Je vais joindre ma voix au débat.
I'd like to share my opinion on this debate. I've already been in this type of situation in 2007, 2008, where we were working with a large number of documents, thousands of pages. And at the time, certain members of the committee wanted to remove a part of the translation. And in the end, it didn't work because these are basic rights, access to both official languages. And in the end, we wasted a lot of time in committee. I think there were 3 or 4 committees full of filibustering. In the end, we received the documents and they were translated, but we had to wait the necessary time for the work to be done. So we could draw this out, but in any case, I think that we're going to end up with the same situation. We can see that we have to translate all of these documents. I think it's dangerous to change the precedent here. As we can see in the past, the precedent shows us we need to translate them. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Well,
sorry. Oh, sorry. Mr. Barrett?
Yeah, I guess I'd just say that, you know, in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks' time, since our last meeting, in that meeting, members who were not in support of, based on their comments, of reporting this to the House, said that they wanted one more letter to go, that it was about just giving one more chance. And that's different than what we've heard today. There's been an evolution. And so now it's more meetings, more witnesses, more excuses. And that's, to be crystal clear, as predictable as this happening today after those departments had an additional 2 weeks to comply with their legal obligation to provide documents to this committee. Following those meetings, as sure as those 2 weeks didn't provide enough comfort for members to support the objective fact that departments are refusing to provide documents to a committee simply because they don't believe the committee has the right. Well, they're wrong. It's not a debate. There's no question on if what they're saying is right or wrong. What they're saying is wrong. And we heard it from officials before, and we heard it from a minister here, that they were going to see what they could do. The only thing that they can do that is compliant with their obligations and with the law is to give us the documents. Of course, being mindful of redactions for the protection of personal information or private information. That's been allowed for. This is a refusal. It's a refusal, and it creates a precedent. And this is going to be a problem. And I guess that the thinking, I can only guess at the thinking of some members, would be that they're going along to get along, and that this is going to keep people happy in Langevin block, in the PMO and PCO, I guess. But what is the effect if we're disregarding the precedent and the law to just say this is politically inconvenient for the current government, when it's strictly an accountability measure? And it's, when we talk about, people talk all the time, they talk all the time about being concerned about Canadians' confidence in public institutions. This is the exact opportunity that everyone has to demonstrate that this place works. That we asked for information. There's been no judgment made by this committee about the information that is provided, except the absence of information that was ordered, in that it wasn't given to us, and that it was not in the acceptable form, and that it was not in both official languages, in spite of the capacity for those documents to be tabled in both official languages. If you, Chair, were in receipt of a letter and you informed this committee that departments, all of them, had said, there is one reason why we haven't provided this information to you in a fulsome way in both official languages, it's because of time. We don't have enough time. I could wholeheartedly support an extension. It would be disappointing, but I could support that. But you don't have that letter. They haven't sent it because that's not why we don't have the information. It's because they don't believe that this place matters. They don't believe that the powers of Parliament matter. The way for them to show that is to have respected the obligation that they had to table the appropriate documents in the appropriate form with the clerk of this committee. I've read the analyst report. Like Ms. Vignola, I did not read every single character that was tabled with this committee. And I didn't read it both in French and in English. Well, in some cases that wouldn't be possible because they didn't give it to us in that format. But I did read every word of the report that is the subject of the motion that's on the floor that we're about to vote on. And I haven't heard, since my last intervention, anyone take the opportunity to tell me what the analysts got wrong. I listened for it. I stepped out for a minute. I'll just look at my colleagues. Was a response offered to my previous question from any of the other members that information the analysts included in the report was incorrect? Did that happen? No. So they've indicated that's not the case when I stepped out of the room, just so that I'm certain. So this isn't about putting a dissenting report forward because we disagree with, or that someone disagrees with the majority view of the committee about what we learned in the study, or giving drafting instructions, or doing clause by clause with analysts. This is just saying that even though it's a fact that they were required to give us the documents and they didn't do it, that some members of the committee are going to make a choice to send a signal to the entire bureaucracy that for all time, If they don't feel like it, they don't have to send it to committees of Parliament. That is the message for every future government. So when committees have this issue in the future, the bureaucracy can always look back to OGGO. And, you know, Chair, you might have to modify your opening, and you might have to call it the once mighty OGGO, because we can't even demand papers from the government, from departments, and have them send them to us. It turns us into a joke. So when we give witness lists to the clerk and they call for witnesses, why would anyone come? We'll issue them a summons. So what? Well, we have the power to send for papers and people. No, you don't. You've demonstrated that yourself. So, what's that phrase that I, you know, hearken back to maybe a lesson that I got when I was a young guy? I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed, and yep, I'm just super disappointed. So when we visit those classrooms, when I visit, I can't speak for anyone else. When I visit a schoolroom, and kids talk, and they ask me why this job is important, because our democracy is so important. I had the privilege to visit 2 schools in my constituency last week in my community, one in Brockville, one in Westport, and I just said that this is what made Canada special, our democracy. That I've been elected in 2018, 2019, 2021, and in none of those elections, there was no bloodshed, nobody jailed, not a shot fired. Peaceful in those cases, even if much to my chagrin, continuation of the government. But before my time in politics, in 2015, a peaceful and orderly transition between one party to another, because we have traditions and we have laws and we have the past practices that are able to guide us. And the underpinning of all of that is that this place matters. When people see that it stops mattering and they continue to centralize the power, that it's just a few individuals and everyone else just becomes window dressing, then I think that we'll find that it's not something that history looks kindly on in a broader sense.
Thanks. Mr. Johns?
So I think all I'm trying to do here is have 2 things. First, a question to you, Mr. Chair. Have you written to these departments and they've written back in writing stating they refuse to supply these documents?
Yeah, and the responses have been shared with committee.
Okay. For me, I'd like us to write a letter to these committees and invite them to come here. These departments, and have their staff come before the committee so that we can have them explain themselves. There's 8, 7. Well, we should have them appear before
16
the committee.
departments.
Well, let's start with the biggest violators and start with them, getting them here to explain themselves. And then I think we should consider, before we take this to the House, that we should have some discussion and at least be able to ask those questions of those public servants of what the barriers are, and then providing us this information. That's again what I'm hoping we can do, and a pathway to getting a result to ensure that our privileges being respected. So I just think taking over the House on this matter without doing this due diligence, I think would be unwise.
Well, seeing no one else, we'll call the vote.
Say before you call a vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colleagues, I'm just going to interrupt quickly. Please put up your hands.
Pardon me,
so
sorry.
we're not repeating on this, please.
Well, I apologize.
And can address your questions to the chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. Chair, I'm not certain what, like, this really seems like some more just an unnecessary delay tactic. I mean, we have asked them 3 times for these documents. There is the sincere possibility, as we've seen with many other witnesses, that they will take the decision not even to show up, as we've seen with some of even the ministers that we have invited, or not, if not ministers, pardon me, certainly other witnesses that we've invited, that they will just make the decision to not come. It just seems as though we are being given sort of one lifeline after another to these organizations, when really they owe us the documents and what we requested. And I don't see why that isn't clear to frankly to all of my colleagues. My colleague Mr. Barrett, referred to an adage he learned when he was young, and we all have learned some, and what I've learned is fool me once, shame on me, or shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And we're definitely getting to that stage where I think we just we have to be clear to these departments and to these agencies that we had very clear expectations that this is what we will want to receive and what we expect. And I don't understand why this isn't. Well, actually, it is clear to me why it isn't clear to people, because, as I said, I genuinely feel as though they are not in favor of transparency for Canadians. I don't deny this, and I won't. I feel this. But anyway, we'll say that it's very clear that in an effort to have the clearest transparency for this study and for this government, we require these documents. We've asked for these documents 3 times, as I have indicated, and this is what we want. We want the documents. We don't, it's like you can only allow someone to explain something so much. Sometimes you just have to ask them to put up what you have asked for. We're talking about expenditures here today. The saying out of popular culture is, show me the money. It basically means, like, just show me what I'm asking you for. And that, I think, is what we have come to expect here. Like, it's so very clear. And if we want to talk about money and expenditures, I mean, like, this then is a very good case where we are sort of having these endless conversations about something that should have been very straightforward, and in fact, Mr. Chair, was made straightforward to these departments and to these agencies on more than one occasion. Pardon me. So, I guess I'll just say in closing that there's no need to ask for another time or for them to come and explain themselves. It's very clear they don't want to hand the documents over. They're unwilling to, as we've determined through this motion. The chair you have exercised the highest level possible of your authority. It's time to refer this to the House. So that's what I'll say in closing. So, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to summarize.
Mr. Johns?
I'll try not to. delay this thing any longer. You know, I mean, it's unacceptable that these documents are coming unredacted, but I also want to recognize that a lot of the redactions are likely personal information, whatnot. I mean, really, we started this study with a focus. For us, certainly, we wanted to know what the harms were being done to the public service and to taxpayers around outsourcing. And, you know, I was excited about that, yes, pursuing that. And I'm worried about where the scope of this study, you know, is really going right now. And we know something's got to be done around outsourcing, certainly around these redactions as well. But it can't be at the cost of getting answers to Canadians as well about what the initial intent is. And we've learned from these documents a lot, and we need to talk about them. We need to not delay the conversation that needs to happen around outsourcing. I'm really concerned that's what's happening now. So we're actually not talking about the problem. And so having them come and testify here, getting the answers from those violators and having them explain themselves so that we can move on, whether, you know, we move forward with this motion. I hope this motion we can wait until we've had them here, make that decision after we've had a chance to hear from them. But I really want us to get back to work on outsourcing and what we're doing here, and the broader situation. So I'm really hoping that we can have them appear here, get some answers, and then start to proceed. And I'm not afraid to revisit this conversation at all in this motion by Mr. Barrett, or sorry, Ms. Kuzi, you know, that so that we can bring it back and have a better, I think, a more detailed conversation after we've had them here. And I think it's actually beneficial to this committee to have them here, to actually ask them, why? Why are you doing this? You know, we can't have this happen again, right? So have them here so that we can ask questions here at committee. I think that serves Canadians and our democracy even better, because we can ask direct questions to them here at committee that can't be asked of them in the House. So that's what I would hope for. So I hope that Ms. Kuzi will consider that. Like, I don't want to vote against this motion today. I want us to, like, you know, I want us to just try a different path and then bring it back. And I know there's more time. I know that's frustrating. I appreciate the frustration. I do.
Are we ready to call the vote? I think we are. Madam Clerk?
So on Mr. Barrett's question, the report is meant to be reported to the House. Mr. Baines?
I vote no.
Mr. Housefather?
No.
Mr. Jawari?
Against.
Mr. Kuzmierczyk?
No.
Ms. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Barrett?
Yay.
Ms. Block?
Yay.
Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Madame Viola?
Oui.
Merci. Mr. Johns?
Well, that is
6 nays,
defeated,
4 yeas.
unfortunately. I won't add fuel to the fire, except I'll get to Ms. Vignola and then Mr. Johns. I will note that concerns about this issue spreading, I think, are valid. We saw earlier in public accounts today, PSBC refuse to provide or follow direct motion from the Public Accounts Committee. So I do express my great concern that this is a great victory for the bureaucracy and the public service in defying Parliament. And I hope we will get back on track where Parliament is supreme and not unelected people within the bureaucracy. Ms. Vignola, then Mr. Gord, or Mr. Johns, sorry.
Donc, vous avez tous reçu une...
So you all received a modified motion concerning the study of Bill C-290 on public servants' disclosure protection. So you received it by email. You have a copy, or we're sending out copies now in both official languages. That pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, February 15th, 2023, concerning Bill C-290, an act to amend the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act, the committee invite the following witnesses to appear regarding the protection of federal public servants who disclose wrongdoing. Pamela Forwards, President of the Board of Directors of Whistleblowing Canada. Joanna Gualtieri, lawyer. Luc Sabourin, former employee of the Canada Border Services Agency. Julie Dion, former employee of the Canada Border Services Agency. Tom Devine, legal director, Government Accountability Project. And that the committee allocate Wednesday, April 19th, 2023, and Wednesday, April 26th, 2023, to hear these witnesses. So it's pretty much the same motion that we began discussing a few weeks ago. And it seemed that there was general consensus on it at that point, but the dates on which we'll be meeting with these witnesses have changed, and witnesses are aware of the fact that they may be called upon to appear in committee on short notice. And they are looking forward to this because they have several suggestions to make, as well as some motions for the act. Sorry, amendments, rather. And we're thinking about also protecting employees as well as the services that are being provided to the population by the government. And so I hope that we will still have this consensus today, despite the fact that we have changed these dates. Thank you.
Ms. Block?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just have a question in regards to the last point that Ms. Vignola made in regards to the calendar and how this might impact the calendar going forward. Can you give us some idea about, what fitting in the witnesses appearing on April 19th and then again on the 26th does to the calendar?
Yeah, it works with the calendar that we have open. The only thing I'd suggest is perhaps someone offer a friendly amendment to allow other witnesses to be added as well, if Mrs. Vignola is good with that. Mr. Johns?
That's exactly where I was going, actually. Totally support the motion here. But I just want to clarify, if this is all the witnesses to the bill or if we have an opportunity to submit some further names. Yeah.
If so amended, yes, but otherwise, no. Can I assume that's your offer of an amendment, Mr. Johns, then?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about earlier.
Yeah, the 19th, I think, is already set, so can we set by perhaps Wednesday for added witnesses for the 26th? At noon. Keep our clerk happy. A couple of days is fine. And we'll, as always, be as flexible as we can. Right. Can we vote on that? Oh, sorry, Ms. Block.
Just one further question. And I have not dealt with very many private bills in committee in my time. If members wanted to have witnesses appear, would we have had to submit our own motion to have members appear on this study, or
No.
I'm thankful that
Usually the motions have and other witnesses as desired added on to motions. So that's
Okay.
how we usually
okay.
can do it.
So I'm thankful that Ms. Vignola has agreed that this is a friendly amendment to add witnesses. I was just wondering how we would have gone about requesting witnesses to appear on this piece of legislation.
Mrs. Vinola, then Mr. Johns, then Mr. Jouari.
J'approuve tout.
I would support any friendly amendment to add the witnesses that my colleagues feel would be applicable here for studying this bill.
I think you already did.
Thank you.
Mr. Jouari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We support the motion for moving the dates and the friendly amendments that that we invite other witnesses. I believe once all the witnesses comes, we may be in a position to need to consider more than 2 meetings. So I'd like to keep that option open because 1 meeting is already gone with the number of witnesses, and if we need other witnesses coming in, we may get into the 3rd or 4th.
Nothing in this committee has ever done in two meetings,
Yeah,
Mr.
again,
Jouari. But
I didn't want to say that. I
think-
didn't want to say that, but I just want to acknowledge that
Yep.
as the witnesses are going to come
Yep.
from all other parties, we may be in a position to look into a 3rd or a 4th meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we have a possibility, and I have to go, we have to approve this first, and we get to other items on like the line by line and amendments to it. There's a possibility we could, if that's so the case, we have a day set aside for the GG for recommendations. We can move that back, but I'm sure we can accommodate as we normally do with OGGO. I think I saw Mrs. Vinola, then Mr. Johns, did you?
After this is voted on.
Yeah.
Donc, concernant l'amendement,
So, concerning the friendly amendment from my colleague on the topic of the number of meetings, I would be open to adding however many meetings are necessary, but keeping in mind that the study needs to be finished before the end of this current session, that being June. Thank you.
Sorry, colleagues, are we okay with the amendment?
Sorry, Mr. John moved a friendly
Oh, yeah,
amendment. So,
Clerk has
okay,
that. We're
so
gonna
we're
do
voting on the.
No, we're going to vote on the original motion, then the amendment.
Okay. We're
Or
going
the
to
other
vote
way
the
around,
other way.
sorry.
Okay, thank
Amendment
you.
and the other
yeah,
motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we're all, well, do we need a recorded vote, or are we all just, I think we're good with the amendment and with the original motion? Perfect. Before we get to you, Mr. Johns, there's a couple things I need to clear up with 290. I'd like to do that while we're still on track there, if you don't mind. The deadline for amendments C-290, an act to amend the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act, I would like to set for May 3rd, 2023 by noon, if that's fine with everyone. The committee will commence clause by clause for C-290, an act to amend the PSDPA on Monday, May 8th, 2023. And we've got May 10th being held as well, if we can't get through that on the clause by clause. We're all comfortable with that? And it says, well, the GG we had for the May 1st, we'll just play that by ear now, as we see for witnesses. Perfect. And just quickly for the rest of May, we've got 4 open dates. We've confirmed the Treasury Board. We're just waiting to hear from PSPC on a date for one one of the meetings. There'll be 3 open meetings. There'll be a next one for the PBO. Actually, 3 open meetings, one for the PBO, one for PSPC. And then, colleagues, if you give some thought, traditionally in the past for the mains, we've invited the other departments that report to OGGO, PCO. We've had Canada Lands in the past. We've had PSPIP in the past. We had the secretary that looks after meetings. If perhaps colleagues could give thought to that. And or Canada Post, we haven't had for a while. Give some thought. We can discuss it at the very next meeting about filling in the last spot for the mains. But we can discuss that Wednesday, please. Ms. Vanola, is the translation okay? Great.
Yes, it's fine.
Yeah, so I think earlier we talked about the cost of the studies, and I just want to get an idea because I think it's important for us to be prudent. You know, Mr. Chair, you did talk about a previous study that required more documents than this study on McKinsey, which really helped give us some scope on things. So I want to move a motion, and I've got it ready and to be circulated to the committee. So, yeah, sorry, you have to give it to. And it's in both official languages. No, it's not. Yeah, could I? Yeah, I want to move that in regards to the motion adopted on January 18th, 2023 for the committee to undertake a study regarding the federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company. The committee requests the total breakdown to date and estimated cost to complete Part C and D of the motion, broken down cost type and by each department, agency, or Crown Corporation, that this information be provided by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on May 5th, 2023 to the committee.
Debate, anyone? Ms. Block and Ms. Kusi?
I'm sorry, could you just read through the motion again? It's right here.
Sorry, in regards to the motion adopted on January 18th, 2023 for the committee to undertake a study regarding the federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company, the committee requests the total cost to date and estimated cost to complete Part C and D of the motion, broken down cost type and by each department, agency, or Crown Corporation, that this information be provided by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on May 5th, 2023.
Ms. Block?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Johns. Would you like it in both official languages, and would you like it unredacted?
Yes, very much so. I still want the same thing you do.
If colleagues, if you allow me, there's a couple items, and I'll mention this to you and Mr. Johns. You may, I don't know if someone wishes to amend this or if you wish to withdraw and redo it, like we could actually ask the PBO to do it because they would provide it in this timeline in a nonpartisan fashion. One of the things I will note on this motion, Mr. Johns, is having submitted many order paper questions, is the cost as in added costs as opposed to costs they would have incurred anyways. For example, 5 full-time employees assigned to it, they would have been a sunk cost to us anyways. So order paper questions have come back very murky, unless you're a lot more detailed in your request. More as an FYI. Yes, Mr. Johnson.
I don't think I'd have an issue with the PBO taking this on by the state if that's something that my colleagues here would be open to supporting. Yeah. I actually appreciate, I really appreciate your thoughtful feedback.
Yeah, it's just having done very similar OPQs on this, it's not going to come back in a readable fashion, I suspect. Ms. Block?
So are you suggesting that Mr. Johns withdraw this motion
Or
and
someone
take
do a
it back
friendly
and call
amendment
for the
to-
PBO to provide us, to undertake to do this on behalf of the committee?
Sure. Someone can just offer a friendly amendment to change it. Sure.
Yeah, I'd move that.
Okay.
And the addition, Chair, would be that it would read, the committee requests the parliamentary budget officer provide total cost to date and estimated cost to complete.
Sure. Are you fine, Mr.? I'm sorry, was there someone on the Liberal side that had hand up? I heard Mr. Chair, but I didn't look up in time. No? Are we comfortable with that, colleagues? Oh, sorry. Mr. Johns, we're just going to read it back with the amendment.
That in regards to the motion adopted on January 18th, 2023, for the committee to undertake a study regarding the federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company, the parliamentary budget officer provide the total cost to date and estimated costs to complete Part C and D of the motion, broken down cost type and by each department, agency, or Crown Corporation, and that this information be provided by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on May 5th, 2023. Is that correct?
Sorry, colleagues, are we fine with the amendment? I think we're in agreement. Are we fine with the motion? Wonderful. We've got a few more minutes. I'm wondering if, Ms. Block, did you want, we had the outstanding motion, and I'll just, before I hand it over to Ms. Block, this is a motion that had passed in public accounts from actually the governing side, if I recall correctly, that just directs the departments. And sitting in public accounts, it's very, very helpful on getting information back from the departments. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Block.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that reminder. Colleagues, you may recall that I introduced this at one of our committee meetings, and it's been on notice for some time. And it simply reads the following, and perhaps you already have a copy of it, that when undertakings are given by witnesses at committee meetings to provide further answers to questions or follow-up information, the witnesses be given 3 weeks to provide the committee with a written response. If a response is not received within the specified time that the committee then invite the appropriate accounting officer to appear before the committee to explain why the information has not been provided in the time requested. And as Mr. Macaulay pointed out, I was chairing the Public Accounts Committee when they adopted this motion.
Sorry, Mrs. Vinod?
Je me demandais simplement.
I was just wondering if the clerk could send us the motion again so that we could have it in front of us. Thank you.
We'll send it out. I think we had sent it out previously about 3 weeks ago, but we'll send it out again right now. We'll just add my commentary to this. When we do have officials with us and we ask them to get back to us, they're not being forced to, and this takes the onus off our clerk to track them down, or for you to keep track of these requests to ask the clerk to track them down. And I think I can say Ms. Blocka works very well in public accounts. Mr. Shawari, are we okay to move forward with this? Colleagues, are we in agreement? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, I think we're adjourned. I will thank colleagues again for the wonderful change of tone afterwards. I know it's very difficult. I am just as much guilty in the past and sometimes present of that, so I appreciate the change of tone. Thanks very much. We are adjourned.